So good morning, everyone. This is good morning, all of you. This is Bhumika Patel, founder of Guide Runners India, and we've met on several occasions for the certification program for the guide running. And today's session is unique. We have a session on understanding community support, and with us today we have a very special guest, Steve Skidmore. He's an ultra runner from Bristol, United Kingdom. Big congratulations to you, Steve, for your becoming a grandfather today. And so just a little bit about your profile. 17 years, he's been doing community support as a community practitioner for Oldland Parish Council in South Gloucestershire, UK. And the nearest cities to this place where he is are Bristol and Bath, and London is approximately 100 miles to the east. And he is a parish development specialist. Parish has approximately 15,000 residents and 6,500 households. His work involves working with the community to address local needs and to improve access to support services, that is support for young people, not only in education, but also in employment, training, working collaboratively with the local authorities and other organizations, youth services to address gaps in social provision, localized crime and antisocial behavior, provide a wide range of advice and guidance to voluntary organizations to support young moms, older people, and disabled people. And currently, he is doing MSc in Disabilities, Inclusive Theory and Research at the University of Bristol, and he's working on a research project, and he will tell us more about what this research project is about. It's on guide running for the persons with disability. And so over to you, Steve. We would like to know from you, what do we mean by community support, or what encompasses community support?
Yeah, well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's just really nice to kind of be invited. It's pretty early in the UK, but it's nice and quiet. In respect to community support, I think it can mean different things to different people. But I think essentially at the heart of it's about really understanding what the needs of the community are. You know, and not only kind of locally in the relatively small area where I work, it's everywhere. That we got a lot of diversity now, so we got areas that may be kind of affected by kind of financial implications, kind of really low economy. We could be kind of talking about kind of poor access to housing. So some areas, one area where I work, education, training and skills is really low. So in terms of the kind of community support, it's about trying to address that in quite a direct way, and bringing in other agencies that can help. But I think essentially at the heart of this, and I've been doing quite a diverse role over 17 years, at the heart of it, community support, you've got to, I think at the heart of it, it's got to be about kindness, and it's got to be about understanding people, and seeing things from other people's perspective. Excuse me, I'm a little bit dry throat this morning. So it says it's not just one thing, I think, but essentially, if you can look at initiatives, particularly like guide running, where you have a particular group of people that kind of share a kind of common passion about running, and it's kind of through that medium you can start to kind of understand what people need, and you can kind of build that element of support around that. I don't know if that come across very clearly.
So as a part of your work, what kind of community support activities have you been engaged in, especially for visually impaired? What kind of support or community support system is in place for visually impaired?
Okay, if I use the guide running as an example within Bristol, and this is I've done partly within my work and partly voluntary as well, because it's being visually impaired and a runner, it's something I have a passion for as well. So when the VI Runners Bristol group, which was starting to kind of emerge, through my role, I was able to put some of the structures in place that kind of formed it into a kind of recognizable group. So this things like developing their constitution, starting to arrange meetings, so more people can become involved within that group. So we set up a small management committee kind of meeting. So we're able to start to plan things a little bit more as a group. Think about ways of getting more visually impaired people involved, particularly kind of trying to reach out to more guide runners. So very much looking at the way about kind of the way that we kind of promote the group. So I was able to use a lot of my skills that I'd kind of learnt within the kind of community practice to kind of support the visually impaired guide running group, and that worked really well.
What about can you share a little bit about your what is inclusion of visually impaired? What is the work that you're doing with respect to the research and MSc-Disabilities, especially? That's very interesting because we have not heard about that kind of education in India. So if you can let us know a little bit more about what it is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's quite an extensive course, being an MSc. I'd done my degree about 10 years ago in youth and community studies, and I really enjoyed that degree, and I learnt so much, and I'd always intended to continue to keep learning, but working life takes over, and 10 years later I finally kind of made the step of kind of getting back into learning, and it was mainly because I just by chance came across this master's course on disability studies, and I kind of looked into it, and I just find it really kind of interesting, because I didn't know these kind of courses existed, and particularly it's quite a high academic level. So the course itself, it's very much kind of research focus, and it's all about not just about kind of learning your research kind of practices and a bit of a philosophy that underpins research. It's very much based around disability. And one of the aspects is inclusive research. So we kind of look at a lot of the theory based around that, and there are people, quite senior academics, people like Colin Barnes and kind of Mike Oliver, when they were developing the disability theory. And these were all disabled kind of academics in disability activists as well. And the things they were kind of writing about was that if we are going to be doing research about disability, then we need to ensure that we not only involve disabled people within our research, we actually try to encourage disabled people to take the lead on this, because their argument was, if we want to learn about disability, then we need to ensure that that reflects the real lived experiences of disabled people. Um, and they'd kind of recognize that this hadn't been happening. And a lot of the research that was done about disability was done always about disabled people and not with disabled people. Um, and when it comes to, in particular, trying to influence policy, particularly at a national level, disabled people's voices were not really being heard. It was purely just a professional person kind of drawing on their own opinions and not really reflecting the experience of disabled people. So that's where this whole kind of course emerged from, and I found that really incredibly interesting, because I was able to learn about the different models of disability and the different ways disability is perceived. And particularly in the UK, we have this model called the medical model of disability. And this was very prevalent, particularly maybe about 50, 60 years ago, where disability was seen the problem as of a disabled person. You know, this was nothing to do with society. If a disabled person wasn't able to kind of access work, wasn't to have appropriate housing, that wasn't the fault of the kind of society or the government. That was purely the fault of a disabled person because they weren't physically able to engage. And the other side of that argument, and something that's far more prevalent now, is the social model of disability, and that says, you know, it's society's fault that people are disabled. It's a problem that the way society is constructed, the way kind of cities have been built, that's made it inaccessible to a lot of disabled people. So it's society that needs to change to accommodate disabled people rather than trying to cure disabled people. And I
And
found
what
that,
are some of the modules that get covered as a part of this course?
yeah, and so they are pretty much the kind of foundation of this course, that says we really need to ensure that we are proactively involving disabled people. And one of the so we also do modules about purely research methods. We look at qualitative kind of methods of research and quantitative. But we also done, which I found the most interesting aspect, and that was about disability in a global context. So we got to kind of meet and talk up with disability organisations in other countries, and that included places in Africa. We spoke to a kind of mum and daughter in Lebanon that's been providing support for disabled Syrian refugees. And I found it really interesting to see in some of these other countries the extent of this. What we're talking about now is the community support and how that's been developing, particularly over the last maybe 10, 20 years. So in quite a contemporary way.
Talking about your running, what kind of challenges have you faced with your ultra running? I know that you have done several ultra marathons, and how do you overcome these challenges?
Oh, it's something I've never imagined I would be doing. So I've only been running, I would say running properly, for about 4.5 years. Um, it's I didn't think with having a visual impairment as well, because you know, sometimes getting about you know, a busy city, just walking about is incredibly challenging. But I'd kind of been stuck in my kind of office doing work for a long time and not being very, very physically active. And I'd had a kind of few medical problems, and I just knew I had to kind of re-engage with kind of physical activity to work on my fitness and health. When I was younger, I was far more active. And at the time, particularly in the UK, there was a really big push to get people out running. And there was lots of kind of initiatives like doing a couch to 5K. And I thought, well, that seems to be okay, and I'll give it a go. And I have a dog. I have a different one now, but she wasn't a guide dog, but I can do a little bit of a jog. I live right next door to an old railway path, so it's nice and straight and flat. And I thought I'd give it a go, and I'd done my couch to 5K with my dog, just running up and down this small section of a railway. And I just really enjoyed it. I just absolutely loved the whole escapism, you know, and looking back now, just achieving when I was just done my first 5K without stopping, I was just absolutely elated. And it just kind of really progressed from there. So I started to get a little bit more adventurous, and then the more adventures I got on my own, I started to kind of fall over. I had a few accidents because I can't really see very well. And then one of my colleagues said to me, "Oh, I enjoy running. I can come with you, and perhaps I can kind of help you." And then I started kind of running with one of my colleagues, Emma. And then we entered a race, which was the Bath Half Marathon, which was, even to me, it's a massive thing. It's just huge. Something I never thought I'd even run a half marathon.
Sorry, what was the name of the half marathon? I couldn't catch it.
Bath. So it's the city of Bath.
Okay.
Which I live close to, and it's a fantastic city as well. So this was another major step. So I ran that with Emma, and we also used that to raise money for guide dogs, UK, which was really nice. And it got to a stage where I was running on a really regular basis. I could really wanted to do some more training. And another friend of mine, actually, when we were running the Bath Half Marathon, we kind of bumped into a couple of other visually impaired people that had guide runners. And I hadn't really known much about this. And one of them kind of gave me a contact. And this was for Colin, who had, at the time, was setting up the Bristol group. And I made contact with Colin. And before I knew it, I was running on a regular basis and had access to different guide runners. And because I was a little bit more adventurous, I started to join in some of the off-road running with another running club that kind of supports very proactively supports the VI running group with guides, and tried running off-road a little bit, and it's just running through fields, and I find it really just incredibly nice. Such a big difference from running on the roads. I think the road races are fine because you haven't got many obstacles, but going out training on the road, so mainly got to be on pavements, and you're going up and down, and particularly where I live, you got make lots of cars parked on pavements, you got lamp posts, and you got wheelie bins, so there are lots and lots of obstacles, and I get really anxious, particularly going out training within that environment. But when I started to run off road, and you're just running through fields, even though it could be muddy, it could be stony, and it could be a little bit lumpy and bumpy, I for some reason I didn't feel as anxious. And as things progressed, because there was a few of
So
our,
how do you deal with the obstacles that you're talking about? That do you remember which obstacle? Do you take a known route which is comfortable for you, or do you prefer to take new routes and go along as the guide tells you?
I normally go by what the guide says. And I think the difference between running off road and then working towards ultra marathon distance, you also run a lot slower, and it's a lot more relaxed. So if we're running through a field and there's a big dip that comes up, or you're moving from grass into mud, then the guide would just kind of give reference to that. So the difference between running on the roads and through the fields, on the roads, a guide will be constantly having to tell you about maybe a lamp post, or there's a bus stop, or there's a curb coming up. They would talk more about what the terrain was like, or if you're running on grass, or if you're coming to a part that's muddy. Um, on some of the pictures I share with the group, I mean, we've even ran through rivers and that kind of thing.
Wow.
Um, but it's and a lot of the time it is about just lifting your feet up higher, just in case you do trip. But you're running at a slower pace. You got to stop a lot, because particularly on the ultra runners marathons, if you're running through lots of fields, then there'll be gates to go through and that kind of thing. So I would say they're more quite gentle obstacles, as opposed to trying to run fast on the road. Um,
How many ultra distance events do you participate in annually?
um,
How do you train for these?
right. So this year, I've only done two because of the COVID. And the year before, I think I ran four. Um, Next year, I've already got six lined up, because we've had quite a few cancelled this year. And they're quite different ultra marathons as well. So I've got one. Um, there's a local ultra marathon in Bristol called the Green Man, and it's got two distances. One's a 30-mile and one's 45 miles. And I've done the 30-mile distance 5 times. Um, but I've also won that in the veteran category twice now as well. So I'll be doing that one again in March. Um, and it's really nice because it's local, so I'm able to go out with guides training on that on a very regular basis. And it actually goes past a few hundred yards past my house, which is quite nice on a 30-mile run.
What's
Um,
your typical training week? How does it look like?
Right. At the moment, it's really hit and miss, because I'm not able to go out. But maybe I can relate more to last year. So on the weekends, it's normally the long run. So on a Monday, I would say I'd normally go out with a guide, just maybe doing. It might be a short run, or it might be doing like an hour of hill training. On a Tuesday, I would normally do some kind of cross training. So that might be using like a spin bike indoors. Wednesdays, we normally have our group guide running sessions on a Wednesday evening. So mostly that would involve maybe like a 4 or 5 mile run. And we always have a social on our visual impaired running night. So we always meet at a pub and finish at a pub, which was a really great way of meeting, and it's very community orientated. Um, Thursdays, I would normally have a rest day, so I give my whole kind of body a rest. Fridays, I would normally go out for maybe a short run, or do some interval training. Um, So interval training is really important for your long distance running as well, because that helps to build up with your stamina and endurance. And then on either a Saturday or a Sunday would be a long one, and that would, if I haven't got a race, it would be maybe like an 18 or 20-mile run, all off road, and with trying to incorporate various different kinds of terrain, and that would kind of consist of the just a normal week. So if when I would say I'm in full training, I'll be looking at maybe doing about 150, 160 miles a month.
Oh,
So
that's a lot of mileage.
it's quite
So
a lot of
now,
miles.
so now with the in these times, how much has it reduced, and have you switched over to alternate workouts?
Yeah, it's been I've been using a spin bike a lot more. So I've not been able to go out running as much. At the moment, even though we've got a 4-week lockdown in the UK, but we are allowed to meet up with one other person outside. So we are able to go and meet up with a guy to do some running.
Okay.
But because my daughter, we don't live with each other, but I was just determined. So I know I had a grandchild coming. So we've been social distancing for quite a long time, so not been meeting up with people. But hope next week I'll definitely be going out for a really long run. So I've been missing my running a lot lately.
Yeah, I'm
But I
sure.
also need to keep on my health as well, because if you kind of miss maybe even 2 or 3 weeks running or exercise, it seems like the weight comes back really quickly.
Yeah,
Um, so I think a lot of particularly the VI runners that have struggled through this lockdown to keep themselves in shape, because it's interrupted their kind of training so much. And that's whether somebody does, we have the park runs, which I think you may have in India. So really large groups of people meet up on a weekend and they'll run a 5K. And a lot of our kind of visual impaired people do a park run every Saturday morning. Well, they've not taken place for a year, and that was their main kind of thing to train for each week. So they've not been able to do that. So that's had quite a severe impact on not only their training but their health, because they could be like 6 or 7 weeks without going out for a run. So it's almost like stopping and starting training, then
yeah.
having to stop.
So
So
I'm sure a lot of them, I know a lot of them have put on weight in this lockdown.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I
So
know
what
now.
would be
So,
your advice to people, the fence sitters, keen to take a plunge into ultra running? Should they have a certain number of years in a particular distance and then move to ultra runs, or any other criteria that would fulfill getting into ultra running?
no, I don't think so. I would say more. Um, Even if you were to go out and rather than maybe do like a road run, just try a little bit more off road. And I don't think the distance is important. It's about just trying to kind of enjoy that experience. And it's something you can kind of build up to, because even and I think it's understanding is well. I know I'm not going to go out and I'm not going to be winning lots of races, but the enjoyment I get out of kind of ultra running is just having a slightly different experience. Um, and many of my kind of ultra marathons I do now, or even training runs, if I'm going out for maybe a 20-mile run, it's just having that time out, and just to go out to do something different. And I think you can just gradually build your way up into doing like ultra marathon distance, and it can be quite an enjoyable experience, because I've still yet to do an official road marathon. And I was due to do one back in April this year, but the training for that was so different to doing an ultra marathon. So with the road marathon, it's very much time focused. And I've kind of said to myself, if I'm going to do a road marathon, I want to try and do it's in the best time I can. So I had a very kind of disciplined training plan. So I'd done an advanced marathon training plan. So I had to have quite a few different guides, and it's all about kind of running fast and that kind of. And it's incredibly challenging. I'd done a 16-week training plan, and then the event got cancelled because of lockdown. And then I thought to myself, a couple of weeks later, we're able to go out to do one of these Green Man, like the 30-mile ultra running one, because we're able to do that virtually. So we're allowed to start where we wanted from and finish where we wanted, as long as we've done the aspect of the course. But the training for that is just nowhere near as intense as what it is to do a road marathon. So it's a lot more relaxed. It's a little bit strange. It's also, some people would kind of refer to an ultra marathon more about being an eating and drinking competition rather than like a fast-paced road, because once you kind of go over that kind of 26 miles, you need to kind of start taking on more nutrition. You need to ensure that you've been drinking properly throughout those first 26 miles, because once you go over that distance, your body really starts to struggle. So a lot more emphasis on the ultra marathon is about kind of ensuring you're taking on the right nutrition and your body can cope with that, rather than maybe going out to do a really quick 13 or 14 or 14 mile run. You need to focus more on about what you're going to be eating, what you're going to be drinking.
So what are some of the things that you do during and before and after for your nutrition? Any special supplements or any gels and energy drinks?
I pretty well tried everything, and that's another thing about the ultra marathons. It's all about experimenting as well. My body don't respond very well to sports gels, so I was using them for quite some time and trying to persevere, but they always kind of give me a bit of an upset stomach. So then you start to kind of look at other things. So I sometimes I used like a bit of a flapjack or a bit of a chocolate bar. I tend to eat more kind of nuts and dried fruit, and I find that I can digest those a little bit more. Your salt content is really important, because you do kind of sweat a lot, and you need to replace that. Also in terms of what you drink as well. Sometimes I use like a sports drink, but and sometimes I don't. It's a bit about trial and error, because it's so there's a lot more science, I think, behind doing an ultra marathon than what there is a normal road marathon. Sometimes I've even taken sandwiches. I'll have a packet of crisps, because you've got various aid stations you can stop at, and there's a whole variety of things to eat, whether it's crisps or peanuts or sandwiches, malt bread or fruit. So it's and it's very tempting sometimes, even though you've done your training and you've decided what you're going to be eating, you can stop at an aid station and just see something, and because you've kind of worked up your appetite, it's very easy to put your hand out and grab something else just because it's there. So you've got to be quite disciplined. So that's another element of what I really enjoy about the ultra running is all about the kind of experimenting, seeing what you can eat, and about your drinking. And so your conversations I have with a group of ultra runners mainly evolves about your eating and drinking and your nutrition.
So, is there
More,
anything special you do about recovery from the hard workouts?
yeah, I tend to. I think if you when you get your nutrition right, you tend to recover a lot quicker. So it's not too bad. It's so on my last ultra marathon, which was about 32 miles, normally takes, I would say, a couple of days after before your kind of legs aren't kind of hurting quite so much is what they were. But I do tend to eat a lot of pasta dishes, lot of rice, so quite high carbohydrates, and I think that really helps with your recovery. Um, but normally within a couple of days, I'll start doing some short runs as well, just 2 or 3 miles, and just nice slow pace. And they kind of tend to refer to that is recovery runs, and then it just kind of eases you back into your training. Um, so yeah, it's a kind of it's almost the ultra marathon or ultra running almost becomes a different kind of lifestyle, um, where you're kind of always looking at what you're eating and what you're drinking,
Right.
um, always very limiting. Alcohol is a really bad thing when you're an ultra runner, because particularly things like beer. It's almost you've got to either not do alcohol at all or really restrict that. It has, particularly for me, it can have a very negative impact on your running and, well, of course, your overall health. Um, and I've tried all different kinds of diets. I tried a plant-based diet for 6 months, which was full on what they would say was a vegan diet. And a lot of ultra runners are vegans or plant-based. But it didn't kind of work for me. It didn't make much difference. In terms of losing weight, there's also things like keto diets. So that's very much based on, that's a lot of meat in very carnivorous diet, lots of fat. And again, there's lots of science around that. It is about how your body burns off the ketos, and you can lose weight quite quickly. But I think it's one of those kind of diets that when you stop, you very quickly put the weight back on. Um,
Yeah.
so I think what I've learned over the last couple of years, it's really important just to maintain a nice balanced diet. So not think about any particular diet apart from, having sensible portions of food, making sure you've got a really good balance, particularly the carbohydrates. Um, so yeah, it's helped a lot with my health, and I think that generally, but particularly with our running club, when we have our socials after our run, again, there's a lot of talk about kind of nutrition and you kind of wider health benefits around running. So it does create a really healthy and environment.
Yeah.
And I think that's particularly great, particularly some of the new visually impaired runners that's joined their group that's really perhaps struggled with their general health. Before long, when they completed their first
Yeah.
5K, or they're very focused on their health, and
Yeah. So
you know
running has helped with the overall improvement of their health, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so, and that's whether they run a 5K on a regular basis or an ultra marathon. I don't think the distance is important. It's
Right.
just about that
Yeah.
whole environment, and celebrating your achievements. And And when you have all that moral support from all your other friends that's involved in running,
Yeah,
um,
that's
it,
important.
yeah, very
So
much so.
coming back, Steve, to community support, do you see any difference in the nature of community support pre-COVID and post-COVID? Since you have been doing that work for long years now, and if yes, what's the difference, and how do you think community support should adapt to this changing situation?
Well, yeah, I think it's going to change quite a lot over the last 8 months with the COVID, particularly within the UK, and I know that it's been done quite global. We've had set up what's called mutual aid groups. So we have our normal kind of like charities, non-government organisations, but there's been a lot of mutual aid groups set up and normally run through Facebook, and it's just people in their communities that started to kind of help to organise things within the community, supporting people that's been kind of isolated in their homes. So ensuring that they're getting their food supplies. It could be some of the older people that's been isolated. So people's been able to go out and maybe get their medical prescriptions, and little things that make a big difference, like bringing an older person that may not be having contact with anybody. So that seems to be, it's a lot more frequent now than what it used to be. And I think it'd be really nice if these things continue post-COVID as well. So it's more about communities kind of supporting themselves, and just being and just all those little extra things to just generate that extra bit of kindness. And I think that which is such a big part of kind of community sport is just encouraging people to look out for each other, for neighbours to keep a closer eye on each other. So it's not so much about kind of big charities and organisations doing things, but I do think they do need to adapt, particularly in terms of kind of working with each other a lot more. But at a community level, it's about continuing to encourage people to look out for each other, be kind to one another, and try to continue to support that. So if there's small little groups kind of setting up in the communities, making sure they got access to the right resources so they can continue to do what they do. So if they've set up a little forum, say for a kind of group of older people that's kind of socially isolated, ensuring that that kind of thing can continue, and it's not just because we got the COVID. It's hopefully we can continue to do some of these things, and I think it just create it could bring a lot closer this thing we talk about within the UK is community cohesion. It's a word that's been wrote a lot
Sorry,
over
can you repeat that? Community what?
cohesion.
Cohesion. Okay.
Yeah, so relating to, I think it's one of the buzzwords within kind of community work that's been used for a long time. But I think one of those words that maybe gets overused within the kind of writing aspect, and don't really amount to much. But I think something what the kind of COVID-19 has helped to do is help to this for this cohesion to happen, because people are coming together a lot more. They are looking out for each other a lot more, and this is what it's really about.
So
Um,
is there a buddy system in place for the elderly people who are, especially from the disabled people needing special support?
yeah, we've got quite a lot of organisations within the UK, but I think the majority of the support at the moment is being done at a very local level, and it's far more neighbourly than what it used to be. We have organisations like RNIB, supporting blind people. We have a very active organisation called Vision Southwest that cover my area. So they set up kind of initiatives to kind of encourage particularly visually impaired people to kind of keep social contact throughout the kind of pandemic. But in essence, the majority of things have just been done at a very local level, and that's encouraged. It's I would say it's almost brought back a lot of the traditional values, particularly in the UK, that I think we've lost over several generations. Whereas there's particularly areas I've lived in where you've not really known your neighbours, and neighbours very rarely talk to one another. But now I think that's changed. So I think people are talking to each other a lot more now. They're
So,
looking
is
at,
there any special provision for persons with disabilities in terms of hospitalization, any kind of emergency support in these in case
yeah,
of a COVID emergency right now?
yeah. So it's there are different organisations that kind of help with that. We've got one within my area. It's a disability action group. So they've got maintained really good contact with as many disabled people as they can, and it's people with all different kinds of disabilities. One of the key things is making sure that people get the up-to-date information. So not all people can access technology, so they're not able to go on the kind of government websites or the Facebook. So it's ensuring people get that information. So some things are kind of dropped, kind of leaflets, or lots of people telephoned, just to make sure they're got the up-to-date information. And also just to keep contact with people, because we have found that a lot of people become isolated. Yeah, so it's a little bit piecemeal. I think there's a lot more kind of emphasis put on kind of self-support in the community than what there used to be. So
That's
I think
wonderful
some
to
of,
hear. Yeah.
yeah, because I
And
think
thank
some
you
of
for
the lot.
leading it and letting us know about that.
Mhm.
And also, this year's theme for the International Day of Persons with Disability is building a more disability inclusive, accessible, and sustainable post-COVID-19 world. So, can you share a little bit about what this means and how groups like ours make this part of our ongoing work?
Yeah, I think this morning is a really good example. I think it's about getting people talking, and getting people in different parts of the world communicating, and kind of being quite expressive about what disability means, and really highlighting not just some of the kind of shortcomings in disability, but also in a way celebrating some of the achievements that perhaps are being overlooked. Um, from my experience now of being involved as a visually impaired kind of runner and making contact with lots of more different people, I think disability, it's something that should also be celebrated, because there's some amazing things being done, and this is all around the world. And I think sometimes they can be very quickly forgotten about. You know, we have things now like the Paralympics, which is absolutely fantastic, but sometimes the legacy is not going very far. Um, so I think we have to do a lot more in terms of bringing organisations together where we can actually celebrate what's being achieved around disability around the world, and start to create something a bit more aspirational for disabled people, because it can reach out a lot further. And I know there's big differences between countries. I mean, the UK, I think, is one of the fifth richest countries in the world, but we still have kind of deprivation. We still have a lot of disabled people that's really struggling, and I think they have a lot more in common with people in some of the other countries. So I think when we start to look at this in more of a global context, we got a really good opportunity to kind of bring people closer together. And I think that this is what this whole kind of inclusion post-COVID needs to kind of look towards, is about bringing people together and celebrate. Something we've done, I would say, quite well within the UK over the last 10 years or so, is have a focus on celebrating culture and diversity. And something they do incredibly well in schools in the UK. So they celebrate a lot of the different festivals, which are kind of celebrated all around the world, different religions. And it's really nice to see my grandchildren. I've got 6 now, but my oldest ones, and it's really nice to see. I've got a 9-year-old granddaughter, and they're always doing really great things in school. They're always learning about different cultures and celebrating events. I think we also need to do that with disability. You know, there's so much goodness there, and so many good things going on. And something I've learned from not only like the guide runners in India, there's groups like the Achilles International, and down to our small little group within Bristol. You know, it's full of this kindness. It's very organic, and it just creates a really nice feel. And where you bring, this is why I was really keen to do base my research around the kind of guide running, because it brings people together from all different parts of the world. You know, people from all different walks of life, different backgrounds, different cultures. And I think that's something that needs to be celebrated.
Yeah. So
And,
we
and
are
when I,
going to celebrate it to December 3rd is the International World Disability Day.
yeah,
And I'm so glad we had you, Steve. And so now I would like to open the forum to for questions. The participants can unmute themselves and ask questions. Any questions from the audience?
Hi, Steve. Uma Pai here. Hi.
Uma.
Hi. Nice to hear you. It was very, very interesting. I just had a personal experience of my chartered accountant, who is also like he completely lost his vision. And unfortunately, he also got COVID. Maybe it was because of contact. He doesn't know where he is going, what is going. Sometimes, it happens, contact. So for him, there was no separate facility as such here in our Bangalore. So how do you handle the situation there? Do you have a separate facility for VI with an attendant? Otherwise, how do they manage a COVID patient?
Right, I'm not aware of anything in particular being set up.
Okay.
But most, all of the kind of staff involved in the health services will be trained to deal with such situations. And so ordinarily, whether somebody's got a visual impairment or different disability,
Yes.
the particularly kind of emergency services and staff in hospitals, they would be treated the same as anybody else.
Okay.
But the staff would just do their best to kind of try and safeguard that person. So there aren't any separate facilities. They would just try to do their best, just within to kind of be part of that normal health service and access to kind of provision in the normal way.
Okay. Thank you, Steve, because I was just thinking, maybe I thought with an advanced country like yours, I know you are also on second laptop. I thought, okay, you might have, with all your might that you have behind you, or differently able, maybe you would have requested them to have a separate facility for them, because even their family people are not allowed, that because of COVID. So I don't know. I mean, that's why I just wanted to check whether any better facilities are done there because of COVID. Otherwise, it's okay, but because of this particular situation. Thank you.
No, you're very welcome, and it's such an interesting point because there's a lot of kind of, I would say, the disabled community and a lot of people involved in disability action groups within the UK throughout this COVID pandemic. A lot of disabled people say that they've been forgotten about.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting point. So it's and which is quite surprising for people look towards the UK to think, well, that they should have all these things sorted. The provision should be there, but it's not quite the case with the UK. So yeah, a lot of people, disabled community, saying they've been forgotten, being left out and forgotten about during this pandemic.
Yes, I know. Because the pandemic doesn't distinguish, right, between abled and disabled. It can
Very
strike
much
very. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for your question.
You have a good weekend. Nice. Thank you.
Since Arham has joined, Arham, would you like to ask about any of the challenges that you face? So Arham is a guide with the visually impaired.
Hi. Yeah, so I had a particular question. So this is an instance that I faced with Niket in particular. Whenever we are running, he is very conscious. I would rather say he's scared when we are running due to the kind of obstacles we face on the road. That might be a pothole, a speed breaker, even when we are running on the road, considering the conditions that we have out here. So we have tried various things to try and come over those. So for one, the guide band that usually what people use is something that doesn't work for us. So instead, what we do is we use a bicycle tube, something that is ring shaped and has some elasticity in it. So we form a figure of 8 out of it, and we put it across our waist. So that helps us have more control over each other's movement, and we feel more comfortable running. But he still is he's not very comfortable running per se compared to, now we are triathletes. So compared to swimming and cycling, running is something that we really struggle with. I try to give him instructions verbally of there is, let's say, a pothole or a bump coming up ahead or something like that, but he finds it difficult to cope up with that. So, is there anything in particular that we can do to, at least I can do, to make him more comfortable while running?
Something I'm quite used to. Some of my guides, I prefer them to kind of give me almost command of high knees. So it just tells me I need to kind of lift my kind of feet a bit higher off the ground, whether it might be bumpy or whether a pothole, because I get quite anxious as well on the roads. That's a big part of my vision. Is things like potholes. To me, even if I could see it, it could be a shadow, it could be a small puddle, or it could be a big hole. So I get quite anxious about that. So sometimes I prefer those not to be called out, rather than my guide just to say to me, kind of high knees. But something that's helped to really build my confidence, not so much going back to ultra running, but doing a little bit of running on different surfaces. That's really helped to build my confidence. So getting out and running through a few fields, experiencing running on a bit of mud, bit of a stony track, really slowly. But I think that experience of running on different terrains, that's really helped to build my confidence when I am out running on roads as well. So just experiencing something a little bit different.
Steve, just to clarify, Arham mentioned about using a cycling tire as a tether. So
Yeah.
do you use something like a tether, waist tether, to bind with yourself and the guide? And does that give you more confidence, or do you prefer to hold the hands and then? Yeah.
Right. On the when I'm running quickly, I prefer a tether and something quite short. But I have found sometimes we've used there's like exercise bands, so they have got a bit of stretch in them. I find those quite useful, particularly if we're going to be running fast and maybe there's quite a few kind of few twisting turns. Otherwise, I prefer something a little bit longer. And some of the ultra marathons, sometimes I'll be holding a tether and sometimes not, because we're going at such a slow pace, and sometimes walking. But myself, if I'm doing, say, maybe a 10K distance and going quite quickly, I prefer a fairly short tether and something that's got a bit of give in it, just so. And I think you can feel a bit more if you've got any sharp bends coming up, and if your guide kind of little bit kind of delayed, and if you're coming up to maybe a sharp right bend, you can feel that little bit of pull as well as a verbal command. But it is difficult. I think it's a case of just persevering and having that conversation between the vision impaired person and the guide, and keep trying out different things, but always kind of checking to still to see to make sure you feel comfortable with what you're doing. But sometimes it may take a bit of time, I think.
Hey, Arham, how much vision? This is Ishwar Kapoor. How much vision does Niket have?
0, absolutely 0.
Okay, Steve made a lot of good points actually, and so what we could do, Bhumika, is we could have a conference call with Arham and kind of discuss this further.
Yeah, so that is one open point that I feel that is not addressed. They keep bringing up about the modified tether that has been made. So the modified tether, I am not sure at what points the team is using. We need to check that. Yeah. So Arham, we will set up a separate meeting with you and Niket later on.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, there's a program based on what Steve said, very important for communication between guide and runner, and it takes a lot of time, like what Steve said about practicing on different terrain, and then also having runs on very, very steady terrain. You have to build up his confidence to know that his feet have to feel more secure, so he may even need some proprioceptive training for better balance and stability as well.
Right.
So we can definitely come up with a good program for you guys. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
And then
so by
also,
the way, I think Arham and Dr. Ishwar, we didn't introduce you guys to each other. The first time we are meeting today.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, so Arham is the guide for Niket, Dr. Yeah.
Excellent. And also there's a TheraBand I can send you guys that you can experiment with as well. I don't know if you guys have tried that before, Bhumika, but that's another, I think we can send it to you. We'll talk about it offline.
We have it already here, Dr. Ishwar, TheraBand, we have it here. But
yeah,
I use it for my exercise, I use it. Yeah, it could be safely used. That's what they told us, that it can be used for differently able guidance and also.
Yeah, maybe good idea to start experimenting with that as a tether as well.
So Steve, you mentioned an exercise band. Is that is that the band which is used for our strength workout?
Yeah. So
Yes.
some of ones I had used for yoga and things like that as well. Yeah, so I've used absolutely all sorts of different kinds of tethers and bits of old belt and loops that's come off rucksacks and but it's yeah. So my first guide, Emma, we held hands. It's just because she wasn't comfortable using a tether, and she felt that if we did come across a problem, we could just let go. She was always worried that if she fell over, she could pull me over. Um, I think all guides are kind of so I think it's making sure that both the VI and the guide are comfortable with what they're using. So it's always good to try out different things.
I have
That is
I have
the
a
answer. This
continuation
is the
question
tether
for
band we
Steve.
have here. What is available here? This is the tether band I have got. I suppose you're referring to the same thing, right?
Referring to the TerraBand, yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing, right? What we use for yoga and other exercise, stretching.
Yes,
Exercise.
yes, correct.
The same thing, right? Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr.
Yeah, sure.
Any more questions for Steve?
Yeah, I have a continuation of the question that I asked. So the issues.
I'm going to mute everybody else. Just hold on.
May I go on?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So the issue that particularly why I want to talk to you about this, Steve, is because initially when we started off, Niket had zero experience of running. This is last year, and we had a few instances where he almost tripped and fell, and that has really, I would say, scarred him um, in a way that he is not very comfortable. Whenever I say there is a pothole coming up, he just, the rhythm changes, the way he runs changes, everything changes. I basically, what I do is I try to match up with Niket, to match his rhythm, to match his momentum, so as to we can be in sync, and I can predict how far the pothole is or how many steps is it going to take, so I can give him some verbal instructions so as to he can be well prepared for that. But whenever I say anything of that sort, he just goes into a panic mode. And so I have tried to take him off the road, off pavement per se, to run in the trails or to go hiking, but he's very reluctant about that, especially for running. So if he's very comfortable hiking, but he is not comfortable running in the trails because he is a bit scared of that. So I thought with time, if we give it more time, that will probably just fade away and he'll be more comfortable. But that unfortunately is not happening. So is there any way that I can pull him out of that phase and try and get him to become more comfortable?
It's a very difficult one. I've been in that situation myself, and it's several times and managed to kind of pull through it, but can't understand. On one of my kind of recent runs, I fell over really badly and landed on my stomach, and I hurt my ribs, and um, and it knocks you. It really impacts on your confidence. Um, so yeah, and it's not always easy kind of pinpointing how you get over that. I know one of my guides in particular, we can have some really lengthy conversations, almost reflect on our runs afterwards. So whether we sit down and have a drink and have a conversation, talk about how that run went, and have an opportunity to talk about things we felt anxious about. So it's almost like a bit of like a counselling session at the end of a run, because sometimes your confidence can be incredibly low, particularly when you've been doing so well, and then all of a sudden you've had an incident and an accident, and you've fallen over, and it can kind of really kind of set you back a bit. So I think those kind of conversations with your guide, so you can really talk about your own anxieties, and perhaps talk about what you can do to kind of put that right, are quite important. But I think it is a case of giving this a little bit of time, and maybe about kind of reigniting some of that enthusiasm. The person you're guiding, talk about the reasons why he's doing this, about what he wants to achieve, and remind it, and trying to get perhaps that fire back into his belly about about achieving these tremendous things. These are really it's quite amazing what people can achieve, and maybe about try to reignite some of that some of that passion, and hopefully that might help him to overcome some of these anxieties at the moment. A little bit difficult, but I really hope he kind of overcomes his anxieties and pull through, because you just want to be able to enjoy these experiences as well. I don't know whether that helps or not, but
definitely will help. I'll definitely talk to him. I'll take this approach. And certain things that you have mentioned, I've tried that before. And certain things that you have mentioned now, I haven't really thought about that I could use that. So I'll definitely try and do that. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Any more questions for Steve? We are over the top of the hour. I know Steve has been awake all night, and we would like to take a break from the session and give him his time off for sleeping. Thank you for your time, Steve. If no one is going to ask questions, I'm going to just finish off close the session, and we can offline ask Steve any more questions that we have. Yeah, and we are going to regroup again for the research work that Steve is doing with our team, and especially for the guide running for the visually impaired. He has a research project going on. So there's going to be focus groups set up, and we will engage with Steve and team further on in the coming weeks. So Steve, thank you so much for your session on community support, and that was very helpful for us. And I would like to end the session by saying that kindness matters, and no matter how big or small, kindness always has value and a magical ripple effect, and that we learned again today, reiterated by Steve. And let's be kind, and let's continue our community support. And thank you all, audience, for being wonderful and asking so many questions. And thank you, Steve.
Thank you too. It's just been so nice, and thank you everybody for kind of zooming in. It's I think it's so important now to do these things.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Dr. Vikram. Thank you, Vikram. Bye.
Thank you.
Shine on always.
Okay. All right. Look forward to talking soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Steve. I'll connect with you later.
Okay. Thank you.